this is another DrumWise Meets. Today I'm with a drummer who's worked with so many artists that I can't list them all, but to name a few, artists like Katy Perry, Beyoncé, Avril Lavigne, Miley Cyrus, Pink, Celine Dion, Britney Spears, Kelly Clarkson, Aretha Franklin, the BeeGees, Anastasia, Cher, Johnny Cash, the list just goes on and on. I'm here with Wolf. Hi Wolf.
Hey, what's up, Tom? Thanks for having me.
What age did you get into drums, and when you first started playing, what bands or artists inspired you?
All right, good question. According to my mother, when she was pregnant with me, whenever she was around music, I would be kicking. So she said she knew I was going to be a drummer. And so and according to my parents, from the time I was able to, I was just like hitting things, like just playing rhythms on whatever. And when I was 3, they got me a little toy drum set. And because it didn't have clowns painted on the bass drum, I thought it was a real drum set because it looked just like a basic drum set, but it wasn't. It was cardboard shells. They fell apart, and then it was pots and pans. And then they tried to talk me out of playing drums. My father played piano, so they got me piano lessons when I was 5. I wasn't really into it. I learned some basic music theory, and then by the time I was around 7, they finally said, okay, we're going to get you a practice pad and sticks. We went to the local mom and pop music store, and I took drum lessons, and they said, if you do this and you're serious, eventually we'll get you a drum set. And so I got my first kit, which wasn't even a complete kit, didn't have a hi-hat. It was just a kick snare and a 1/60s A Zildjian 18-inch, like a Crash Ride I still have today. And then it just grew from there, and did the school music thing, and then joined bands, and I was gigging by the time I was in high school. Went to Berkeley, got a tour, dropped out, and have just been doing it since then. The music I listened to when I was a kid, it was kind of whatever was. I grew up in Philly, so there were the rock stations, the R&B stations, and then hip hop was kind of emerging. It wasn't even called hip hop yet; it was rap, and the R&B stations would play a little bit of rap every day in the 80s. So the beginning of that, and there was the jazz stations that would play some straight ahead jazz, some fusion. I listened to a little bit of everything when I was young. Before I had, when I was really little, I couldn't afford to buy my own records. So whatever my dad had around the house, and then my older brother, and then what my friends had. And then by the time I got a little older and I got more serious in my teens, I was really into fusion, as I was saying before we started the interview. So around that time, like Billy Cobham was, I had a double bass drum set at that point. Simon Phillips also was, and then around that time, obviously, I mean, all the greats. I mean, when I say the greats, not just the fusion guys like Ringo, the less is more players, but the guys I was shedding really hard were like, I was listening to Tony Williams, Lenny White, Steve Gadd, I mentioned, Cobham, and then eventually Dennis Chambers came on the scene, Dave Weckl. Those were kind of the guys in my formative years, and a bunch of others I'm forgetting. But at the same time, I told you before, I was getting into programming because hip hop was emerging, and there was just certain sounds that you could only really create with a drum machine in certain fields. So I was listening to that stuff. I was kind of listening to everything. I was kind of going in 2 different directions. I was really studying hard and shedding hard the fusion stuff, and then playing in cover bands, playing more mainstream grooves, and then getting into programming at home and doing like a little beat making. So
awesome. And you mentioned the cymbal you've still got. Have you still got any of your other first drum set stuff?
Yes and no. The first kit my dad sold when he got me my second kit, which was my teacher, who was an amazing teacher in the Philly area, Elaine Watts. She passed a few years ago. She sold us, it was a 60s Gretsch kit in mint condition, because this was the 70s when I got them, with a 60s chrome over brass Superphonic 5x14, 60s Zildjians, hi-hats, just regular A's, and really old Rogers hardware. And it was a really cool kit. It was 20, 12, 16, which was an odd configuration, but that was like a configuration that was popular then. And the thing is, like, I really wanted the big wraparound double bass kit. So until I was a little older and I could work after high school, like have like after school jobs and summer jobs, and I could save up for a proper big double kick drum set, I was combining my Gretsch kit and some other just like really cheap drums and spray painting everything so they'd match. And I destroyed that Gretsch kit, and trying to put heavier mounts in it and spurs. And that kit was sitting, I still have the snare. I don't use it that much because I actually prefer the aluminum Superphonics. I'm not a huge chrome over brass fan, actually, but I'll keep it for sentimental reasons forever. And that 18-inch cymbal I have, it's full of cracks, so I don't use it anymore. It still sounds great, but I just don't want to destroy it. And and then that Gretsch kit was sitting in my parents' basement for years, and I'd used it at Berkeley. I kind of put it back to a 4-piece for a while, and then it was sitting in my parents' basement. When my mom passed, my father was selling their house, and I got that kit. A friend of mine drove me to Philly. I brought it back to New York and took it to Steve Maxwell's drum shop, and and I got Gretsch. They were really nice. Gretsch sent me all new lugs. The shells were still in good condition. The hardware was a mess. So I put completely new, everything that was metal was new on the kit. Refinished the kit, the shells, and just cleaned up the bearing edges a little bit. And now it's like a mint condition 60s Gretsch kit, which I don't have anymore. I actually, there's a studio in Brooklyn called Mission that I do a lot of work at, and they have a 60s Ludwig kit. That's the main kit I use there, but I keep that Gretsch kit. I basically gave that kit to the studio. So, and I get to play it once in a while. If I'm doing a straight ahead session there, we'll pull the Gretsch out and I'll use those. But mostly, I'm always playing their old Ludwig kit.
Good stuff.
So, but that's it. Everything else from back then is gone. So, including the gigantic double bass kit I had for a while, like in my later teens. All that stuff's gone now.
And before we started recording, we were, talking about drums, as you do. And my next question is normally, what equipment do you currently use? But of course, we talked about your equipment situation. So just talk to us about how it works in terms of recording and equipment, mics and all that stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So if I'm doing like a major label session or even an indie thing where there's a big budget and they might want to work at a really big room, like in New York, Power Station, the biggest studios is still open. And then for that, they'll rent me whatever I want. So there's a legendary drum tech. He's mostly known for working with Steve Jordan, but he works with a bunch of us besides Steve. And already has a humongous vintage drum collection. So he knows what I like to play, and he knows what snares I like, what kicks and toms I like. And for a while, my storage locker was next to where he stored all his stuff. So I would just tell him, I'm a Zildjian guy. I have like a few different sets of cymbals that I use depending on the vibe. I have a bunch of A customs for most pop stuff and rock stuff, and I have K cons for almost everything else, and some of the Avidus. So I'll just tell him which bags to grab, but I'll use his kit. But if I'm recording, most other studios that I work at, there's a place here in LA that I've been doing stuff called Ultimate, where I actually shot those Ludwig Classic Maple videos there, and he has some of those drums there. So he's got a huge Ludwig collection, bunch of snares too. And Zildjian West is out here. I'll borrow cymbals from them, and I'll just use whatever drums are there and just tune them how I like them. And like I said, in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, Mission is the main New York studio I cut a lot of drum tracks at. I use a 60s Ludwig kit. He has the 5x14 Blacklight I love recording with. He's got what does he have? 6.5 Superphonic, 6.5 Black Beauty. I think he's got two different 6.5 hammered bronze. I always forget if it's hammered brass or hammered bronze, but it's, so I use those. And then Jungle City, which is that place is kind of the fanciest studio in New York, and it's always booked up with like A-list recording artists. So like when I'll record with Alicia Keys, because she actually owns part of that studio, I'll work with her, and Alicia and the owner of the studio and have a huge gear collection, and they have a couple great vintage Ludwig kits I'll use. They have like bags of cymbals and a ginormous snare collection. So it's the kind of thing where I'm mostly using other people's stuff. And in my own storage locker, I do have, like I was saying, I sold a lot of the stuff that I don't use. So I have two Acrolites, 5 and 6.5, and I have a Blackerlite 5x14. I have the Heirloom Brass, and I have two Superphonics, and that's pretty much it for snares, except for, like I said, my old one that I keep for sentimental reasons. And I have a bunch of Ludwig club dates. Those are my favorite recording drums, actually. I don't know. Have you played the new club dates?
I haven't. No.
If you check them out, they're not quite as bright as the classic maple. They sound to me a little closer to like something like Legacy mahogany, but they're made with it's like maple, poplar maple, I believe, but they have really rounded bearing edges, so they're really nice and fat and pretty warm. But because it's some maple in the shell, they still project a little more than like a straight mahogany shell. And they, like, if I were touring, I don't know if that would be the kit I would use, but for recording, they just, to me, they're the best recording kit Ludwig makes. So I have a bunch of different sizes that I have: a 20-inch kick, 22, all 14 by 20, 14 by 22, 14 by 24, 12 and 13 toms, and 14 and 16 floor toms. So depending on what I rarely play more than a 4-piece kit. So depending on what it is, I'll set up whichever sizes. And I have a bunch, like I said, a bunch of bags of Zildjians. But like I said, I mostly don't use my own gear for recording, and that's for drumming. And for programming, that's a whole other gear talk. But for drumming, I rarely use my own drums in the studio. Just kind of how it is.
And programming, while we're talking about it,
yeah,
is that Logic? Are you on Pro Tools?
No, actually, it's Pro Tools, and only because I've been using Pro Tools for so long, my workflow is really, really good on it. And also, I don't know how much longer it's going to be this way, but for years, Pro Tools has been the industry standard. So even like my friends who are producers, they might do all the MIDI composition in Logic or Ableton or Cubase, but by the time they're ready to really add live audio, be it drums, vocals, like guitars, they're going to do it in Pro Tools. So by the time I show up at the studio, when they're going to have me programming, or a lot of times they just send me stuff and I work remotely. So, which is that's kind of all I've been doing during the pandemic. But under normal circumstances, if I'm at a studio session where I'm playing drums already and they want me to record, I'll bring my little thumb drive with a huge sample area, and I can just sit in front of Pro Tools and just work on the grid and do what I need to do. And if I want to use like addictive drums, like I was talking about, I'll download all of my addictive drum ad packs and just temporarily like license it to the studio computer I'm using. So I use other programs. I use Battery and a bunch of other stuff, but mostly I can always get by with addictive drums and then my own sample library, and I'll do that in Pro Tools. But I've been noticing there's some heavy like names that are starting to not want to use Pro Tools anymore, and they're actually doing everything, including mixing the records in Logic. Because for a long time, I didn't know any major mix engineers who mixed in anything other than Pro Tools, but I'm seeing a shift to Logic, and I understand why. And I've been thinking about making the switch, but for now, I like to travel light. So as long as I know whatever is happening on the studio computer, like whatever the session is, it's almost always Pro Tools. But I, if I have to, I bring my laptop, which has all my everything on it. But yeah, I mean, when I started programming, I had a room full of gear because I don't just program drums. Sometimes if people hire me, I'll program the full track, all the synths. And so I had a room. I had like a 32-channel mixing desk. I had two 30-space racks full of samplers and synth modules and outboard gear. I had I had a few MPC 3000s, one that was hardwired in my home studio, one that I would take to studios around New York, and then one that was just for backup in case one of them was in the shop, because they're notorious for overheating and breaking, or the knobs and the pads start to go. So I had all that stuff, a bunch of patch bays. And eventually, like I got rid of all of it. And my setup now is just, I have a desktop Mac in New York. I have the laptop out here, and just a good pair of monitors. And I have a couple MIDI controllers, but I barely even use those to mouse everything in. So it's everything is software based for me now with programming.
Now on to
Yeah.
influences again, like we talked about before. And disclaimer here,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like this is quite a tough question, and I would find this a hard one to answer myself. But here we go.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you had to pick just one, who would be your all-time favorite drummer?
Okay. Because that's a tough thing, because like I said, doing session work, I have a favorite like singer-songwriter type drummer. I have a favorite like heavy rock drummer. I have a favorite like light rock drummer. I have a favorite straight ahead drummer. I have a favorite big band drummer. Reggae, you name. I just have different drummers that I love forever, and I have favorite programmers. So, but if the drummer that just like speaks to me the most, who I love listening to the most, it's tough. I would say Clyde Stubblefield. Just because I remember I listened to James Brown when I was a kid, but when I was at Berklee was when there was an album called In the Jungle Groove, which was a collection of a bunch of like James Brown stuff from a certain period of the JBs. And that's when they re-released The Funky Drummer, which was actually, when it first came out, was like not very successful single. But when it came out on that record with a bunch of other stuff, that it just caught on, and that's when people really started sampling The Funky Drummer a lot. And but I remember a friend of mine that I went to Berklee with, it was a bass player named Jim, who had a boombox, and he just brought it into the practice rooms where sometimes we would play drums and bass. And he was like, "Oh, check this out! I got this James Brown collection with like a really young Bootsy Collins on bass." And I didn't know Clyde Stubblefield's name at the time. And he played it, and we just listened to the whole record from start to finish. And when that was done, I was like, "Play it again." And like we probably listened to the album, I don't know how many times on repeat, but I had never heard drumming like that. And that like and then I became like a Clyde fanatic. And I just, and the thing is, even within James Brown, like I love Clyde's drumming, but I also love Jabbo, and I also love Melvin Parker. I love different drummers for different James Brown songs, but just something about the way Clyde plays, his feel, his phrasing, like when he does fills, when he doesn't do fills, he's just, yeah, I just really dig his drumming. But I mean, there's so many others. Like you said, it's an impossible question. And I think for any drummer like us that be versatile and play a lot of different kinds of music, you're going to fall in love with a lot of different drummer sounds. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's kind of with some people, with some interviews, I've said, I believe we evolve as drummers and we take on different influences as we grow. And so, and it's true. It's not. You can't really. It's really hard to. But I suppose there's one that's kind of in our hearts, isn't there? That like from when we were younger. You've obviously worked with a lot of people and you've done a lot of stuff. So this may also be a tough question. Yeah. What's been the highlight of your career so far?
Man, that's a tough one. That really is. Because I've had a lot of bucket list moments. So I really don't know. And then what I will say is there were jobs that I thought were going to be the highlight that I really didn't enjoy, like working with I'll be honest, I don't listen to most of the records that I work on. Like we were talking about some stuff before we started recording, and it's all, I completely respect the craftsmanship that goes into making a good pop record, but it's just, I don't love it. I listen to everything because I got to stay current to work, but I always have to be able to know my references if a producer or an artist wants something. But there's a lot of stuff that I don't like. And so when I get to work with, that's separating from the hang. There are a lot of artists that I don't love their music, but they're great people and it's just fun to work with them. And then when it's somebody that you like them as a person and you love their music, that's like winning the lottery to me. So there have been times where I got to work with an artist that I loved, like I was a fan of, and then working with them, it kind of ruined it for me. Like going to the studio thinking this is going to be an amazing day, and then it was just such a horrible experience. I'm not going to name any names, but there were like a few artists that I grew up listening to nonstop that I worked with that I just did not dig it at all. So man, it's hard to pick a highlight because like my first gig, the gig that I dropped out of Berkeley with was to play with, I don't know if you'll know who he is, but he was a really major session guitarist in the I guess 70s and 80s named Hiram Bullock. And he had a major label record deal at the time. He was part of the original David Letterman show band. It was him on guitar, Steve Jordan on drums, Willie on bass, and Paul Schaefer. So I grew up watching him on TV, and I would see him live when he toured. And Charlie Drayton, who's I don't know if you know Charlie. Charlie's one of my favorite drummers. Charlie had quit his band. I took over for a while, and just playing with Hiram's band was, especially like being a kid. I was 20 when I got the gig, and just being thrust into that scene where all of a sudden I'm playing with my heroes, and then through him meeting all these other people. Saint Grover Washington Jr. I grew up in Philly. Grover is a Philly legend, and you know, when you're a kid, there's certain songs you play at jam sessions. You play Mr. Magic and Chameleon, and so getting to tour with Grover was a huge deal, especially because a lot of my like Steve Gadd and Harvey Mason were the main drummers on all Grover's hits, and playing with all these bands, like it's not just the artist but the sidemen, the level of musicianship. It's like that to me. That's it's such a great way to grow as a musician is to play with these people. And even the Lighthouse Family I was mentioning, like I don't love the Lighthouse Family's music, but the band was incredible. And there was a British percussionist named Danny Cummings playing in that band. And I don't know if you know who Danny is, but such a monster percussionist. So just like every night, just locking into these grooves and hearing his percussion like right there, it was so much fun. But yeah, I don't know about a highlight.
The easy answer here would have just been to say,
Yeah.
Right now, talking to you, Tom. You know.
Oh well, that's a given. So you know what I'll say. Playing on Saturday Night Live. I've played on Saturday Night Live a few times actually, and once subbing for Sean Pelton in the house bands. Once playing with Annie Lennox as a musical guest, and once in a sketch playing a drummer for a comedy, it's like actually being a drummer as part of the comedy sketch. So growing up watching that show, the first time I was in there, like playing live and seeing like the record light go on, that was a highlight. I don't know. There's a bunch. I mean, if I think back, like there's just certain moments that like I'm playing and I can't believe I'm here and I'm looking around at the people I'm playing with. So. But yeah,
that's good. It's all good.
Sorry, I don't have a great answer for that.
That's all good. That's all good.
Yeah.
So, obviously, I know a lot of your work these days is in the studio, but I'm going to ask you this one because it's a recurring question with these interviews. You know, when you were touring with Annie Lennox or Lighthouse Family or whatever, have you ever had anything go wrong on stage that you've had to recover from?
Yeah. Because they call it hybrid drumming now, but back in the day, they didn't really have a term for it because not a lot of drummers were doing it yet. So I was one of the first generation of guys to just, we figured it out as we went along, and like the technology wasn't that great yet. And we were using floppy disks to load it was a big deal if your sampler could hold 20 seconds worth of sampling time. That was a big deal. So, and I now use Roland multipads if I ever need to do something live. I really don't play live anymore. Like the last time I played live was the Seth Meyers show where I was a guest drummer on that. And then Oz Noy, who's like one of the few non-pop artists I work with. I did a bunch of stuff with Oz, but for that stuff, I'm just playing an acoustic kit. But when I was touring, I eventually switched to Roland SPD pads, but I started out using a Drumcat, and the Drumcat was notorious for just completely failing. And I don't know if you've ever used it, but the selling point was there's no buttons. You just use the pads to edit. So if one of the pads goes dead, you can't edit anything. So I I remember playing in like big arenas, and all of a sudden, and these are gigs where I have like a kick shell mount trigger, a snare shell mount trigger, and the pads, and it's a big part of the sound is having those sounds, and just in the middle of the gig and I would do a drum solo with like a lot of MIDI stuff, and I just remember like playing, in front of like 20,000 people, and the electronics just go down. So that was never fun. And besides that, I mean, I've done a bunch of gigs. I didn't love touring. I was sick all the time. So I just, like, the first time I played the Hollywood Bowl, which is some place I grew up really wanting to play for, like the Playboy Jazz Festival, all my heroes had played there. I was sick as a dog, and I was like delirious the whole set. So there were times like that. I don't think I've ever like really fucked up. Can I curse on here? I don't know if I can say that.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I don't know if I've never had any like major fuck ups myself where I just think it ruined it. But there were times where my gear failed, and I had to kind of like try and pull it together. Yeah, I think those were like the nightmares for me, was when the electronics would go down. The electronics now are so much better, and now like every touring drummer I see, they have like and I'm sure you have it too, have like a full electronic rig. Everything works great. They have their laptop, the pads. But yeah, back then it was like a whole different scene. So it was those nights weren't great.
Now I've got a string of hard questions here for you. So this is probably the last nasty one. Because I don't know, it might be a really straightforward answer. What's the hardest song you've ever had to record?
That's actually, I can tell you that one. It's Aretha Franklin. It was one of the last records I did before she passed, and it was a covers album. And so the song I played on was not meant to have live drums. And it was one of those days where like I got a call from Ann, who owns Jungle City, that I was talking about, Alicia Keys' place, just to see if I was in New York and if I was available to come to the studio. And I said, okay. I didn't even ask who the artist was, because I knew anybody, like, that place is always booked. You're in the hallways, you'll see like Justin Timberlake or Jay-Z, and I've recorded Beyonce stuff there, Alicia Keys stuff there. So I knew it would be a legit session. So I get there and I ask what it is, and they say it's for Aretha Franklin, and I love Aretha. So one of my favorite singers, and they told me the story. Her vocals had already been recorded. Babyface, who is also one of my favorite producers, was producing, and it was a ballad with a full orchestra, no drums, with like the time is like this. There's pauses, there's speeding up, it's slowing down, and it was all conducted. And that's the only way to get through, and it's like 5 minutes of that, of massive tempo changes and holds, reintros. And if that's the kind of thing you were going to have a drum set on, I would have had to play there watching the conductor. But Clive Davis, who was in charge of the record, decided he really wanted a lot on the song. So they were recording there, doing some other stuff, recording some Aretha Franklin wanted to do some backing, have her background singers there, I think. So Babyface was cutting backgrounds, and so they asked to recommend a drummer. So I was recommended. I go in, and I sit with Babyface and the engineer, and they show me there was no click track, obviously. So the engineer painstakingly manually created like a MIDI map and added a click with following all the time changes. And then so I wrote a chart for myself with like a roadmap to just kind of follow along. And then Babyface went to dinner, and it was just the engineer and myself, and I'm playing, and I had the click cranked up, but I still heard Aretha in my headphones, which was amazing. And it was, I don't know how many takes into it, and it was a long song, that he was like, yeah, it's great, but you're not quite nailing the time. And I thought I was losing my mind, because I was like, I know I'm nailing the click. And then I was starting to get really fatigued. You can only play it so many times before like your body gets tired, and then like your nervous system starts to go. So he was like, yeah, just come on in, let's listen to it and see what the problem is. And I came into the control room, and I asked him what he was listening to. I said, I'm pretty sure I'm nailing the click. And he said, oh, I'm not listening to the click. I'm just listening to you in the track. And I said, turn the click on and just listen to me in the click. And he's like, oh, I'm so sorry, man. I see what the problem is. He said the click isn't totally, because Emmanuel, there wasn't a real click. He had to do it after the fact to try and follow the song. And he said the click's not really with the song. So he said, we're going to have to lose the click and you're just going to have to freeform it. And around that time, Babyface had come back from dinner and he found out what was going on. He was really nice. He was apologetic. And they said, okay, we're going to have to lose the click because the click's not right. And you're just going to have to try and follow along the best you can. And I had my little roadmap and they said, just do a few more takes and just try and guess. Because there are these long like rubato sections and these pauses where it's just Aretha and then the string swell and then the time comes back in. There's no way without a click to know. So they're like, just do the best you can and do a few takes. It may have been 5 takes, I don't know. But I did a bunch of takes. And then they said, between those, we're just going to comp the best parts. And I just remember walking out, and they were really cool about it because and I felt like redeemed when I came in. I was like, listen to me in the click. And he's like, oh shit, you are actually nailing the click. It's just the click's wrong. So, but I remember I was so excited to go and record with because when I got there, they told me it was Aretha. They played me the song and then I had to chill out and I went home for a while while they were recording backing singers. And then I came back. And so on my way back, I'm in an Uber and I'm like so excited. I'm like, I'm recording an Aretha Franklin record. This is huge. And then the session was just so difficult. And I remember when the record came out, I was sure they weren't going to have my drums on it. I was like, there's no way my drums are going to be on there because it was a whole session was such a train wreck. But my drums are on there. So that's my Aretha Franklin credit. But it was like technically the most difficult session I've ever done.
Awesome. What was the song?
It's called People. I think it's originally a Barbra Streisand song, okay. But it's called Aretha Franklin Sings the Great Diva Classics. Okay. And it's all covers. Okay. And I'm on the song People. Yeah.
I will check that out.
It's a very simple drum part. You'll hear it. It's a really simple drum part. It's like anybody could play it, but it's the fact that I wasn't there when they were conducting it. It was just really rough. So, yeah.
Awesome. You've played and programmed drums for some massive hit songs. For people watching this that aren't sure, songs like I Kissed a Girl, Girlfriend, Wrecking Ball. How do you decide what the drums should do in those songs and what they should sound like in those songs? Is it up to you? Are you given some kind of direction?
It depends on the session, honestly. So for Wrecking Ball, that was Dr. Luke, and Luke is a really old friend of mine. I knew him since he was like a jazz guitarist and then he made the transition to mainstream pop and R&B writer and producer. So for that song, the drums had been programmed and I didn't even work on it. It was him and I want to say Circuit, who's like a pretty major producer now who came up with Luke. And there's no drums except for the chorus. And when the drums come in the chorus, it's almost like a big dubstep, like just a big kick and snare. And that's pretty much it. And so what he wanted from me was, he was like, I just want to round out the sound a little more. And this is an example of, I had Artie Smith bring me in basically a Bonham kit. He was like, give me big Bonham sounds. He was like, I could throw a bunch of reverb on this, but he said, why not just have those drums in a room? So that was just his direction. And then all he said was give me options. I want to treat your live drum tracks like a drum machine. So give me just kick and snare, and then do a separate, kind of closed, that Bonham kind of sloshy hi-hat thing. Then give me crash ride, edge of the ride cymbal. And then just give me some individual crashes, and then give me the kick, snare, and hat together, kick, snare, and ride together, and I'll just go through and see what works. And I figured they're just going to find 2 bars they like and beat detect it to sit with the programming anyway. So the main thing for me was just get the sound. So I called Artie and I was like, bring me the Bonham kit. So 6.5 Superphonic. We didn't do 26. I think it was 24-inch kick, but 14 racks, 16, 18 floors. And the thing that I did was everything was wide open, and I tuned the toms to the key of the song. Everything was tuned to a root or a fifth. So when I hit the kick, you hear a chord, and when I hit the snare, you hear a chord. So that whatever overtones you're hearing are going to ring in the key of the song. And I do the same thing when I'm programming. I tune everything to the key of the song, and it's a subtle thing, but it really makes a difference in the track. And with live drums, if it's wide open drums, I tune everything to the track. If it's more like snare with a wild on the snare, it doesn't matter as much. If it's like a dead kick and the toms are dead, it doesn't matter as much. But anytime the drums are open, I tune everything to the track, either a root or a fifth. And so unless the song modulates, then it's a little bit more complicated. Then you got to stop and retune them and then punch in from the bridge or whatever. But for Wrecking Ball, it was more just we spent. And to Luke's credit, like he dropped a lot, the record company's money, I guess. They spent a lot of money getting that kit there and spending an entire day just ultimately to have me going, poof, pah, poof, pah. That's it. That's all I did. But like so much care and attention to detail went into like getting those sounds right. So that was for Wrecking Ball. I Kissed a Girl was also Luke. That was... Again, I think he did that with Benny Blanco. That was programmed. I don't know if I did programming on Hot and Cold, but I didn't do any programming on I Kissed a Girl. That was already programmed by the time I heard it. And he wanted to have underneath the program stuff that boom, 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 so that was already programmed. And he wanted me to kind of give it some live drums. So I did that shuffle with like riding on the tom. And same thing with that. And there was actually, from what I remember, I had a few rack toms set up, and there's some fills going to the choruses, but those fills are mixed really low. But if you listen, you'll hear them. They're in there. It's the kind of stuff. There's so much shit going on in the track, but everything's beat detected, so it just kind of sits with the programming. But my biggest contribution to that song is from the beginning of the song. You hear that boom, boom, boom. It's just, again, a really basic beat, but we probably spent like a good hour or two just dialing in the kick and snare and the tom sounds. And then what was the other one you mentioned? Girlfriend, I was involved with that from the pre-production, where they were, I believe in LA, it was Max Martin, I think, and Luke and Avril Lavigne, and they would just call me, email me an MP3 of an idea of like Luke strumming a guitar and either Max Martin singing or Avril Lavigne humming a melody or something. And that was one. He was like, hey, we're thinking of like whatever was the time, like Green Day or something. He was like kind of like a little bit punk, like aggressive rock, but not full on metal. And he gave me a tempo and he said, here's the form. And, I want this long intro, first verse, pre-chorus, chorus. I want a fill going into the net, like a break, a fill here, a bigger fill going into the second verse, double chorus out, second chorus, ride on the crash, whatever. Just, I don't remember exactly what the song was, but it's something like he gave me really detailed things. And he said, program like a live drum thing. And so I did that. That was before using actually, did I use Addictive Drums on that? I don't know, but whatever. I think I was still using an MPC. I think I had actually sampled some Addictive Drum sounds and programmed on an MPC exactly the live drum part I heard. And then Luke had programmed that just basic beat that's going in. How does that song go? Hey, yeah, in the chorus, it's got that like program thing he has. And then I do all the live stuff. And so I sent him like a stereo track of the program drums, the fake live drums. They built the entire song on top of it. Avril sang her stuff, and then they sent me the Pro Tools session and said, now replace your fake live drums with the full kit. And so it's the same thing. And I did that at a studio that's no longer around called Monster Island with an engineer named Mike Caffrey. And Mike had just bought a 6.5-inch black relight, which are harder to come by. You don't see those a lot. You usually see the 5s, but I actually told him, because Luke told me to Avril drums wherever I wanted. And Mike's an old friend of mine, also from Berkeley. And he had a great drum room and it was near where I live. So I was like, let's do it with Mike. But Mike didn't have a superphonic, like a deep. I was like, I want the deeper shell drum for that. So I was like, do me a favor, just you need one for the studio, just go buy it. So I get to the studio and he pulls out a box and it's the 6.5-inch black relight. And I was like, I said to get a superphonic. He said, well, this thing sounds pretty cool. I'd never played a Blacklight before. And it's, as you know, because you have one, it's like a slightly drier version of an acrylite because of the finish. It's on the inside of the shell too. So that drum just recorded so great. So I use that on all the Avril stuff on that record. And at least all the Avril songs I played on, I don't know, I don't remember. Anyway, I know Girlfriend for sure. It was that, and it was a 4-piece kit. And at that point they had demoitis. So like he was like, Avril wants you to play everything note for note what you programmed. So I just did what I programmed, and we basically did it section by section, because at that point that was like months later, and I'm always working on a bunch of different projects. Like the other night when I asked to postpone because I had an all-nighter, so I didn't even remember what I programmed. So I had to listen. I'd listen to a verse and I'd say, okay, let's record that. Listen to the pre-chorus, let's record that. So I basically punched the song section by section, just like repeating what I had programmed months before that. We beat detected it to line up with the programming and send it back, send him all the drum stems. And so just those are the 3 examples you mentioned, but it's really project by project. Sometimes the producer's in the room with me, sometimes the artist is in the room, and they're really specific about what they want. Or like I've done a couple sessions with Mark Ronson where they actually tell me how to set the kit up, because Mark has like a specific drum miking technique where he puts like an old, I think it's a ribbon mic, where the first rack tom would be, because he wants to kind of get like the bulk of his sound is that mic picking up the hats, the snare, and the kick. And so, but he still wanted fills with the tom, so I had to put like the rack tom where the ride cymbal would be, and then raise the ride cymbal up, and then floor toms there. But like it was so specific. Not only that, he wouldn't let me tune the drums. Artie Smith was the tech on that date, and he had Artie tune him the way he wanted, and he was like, this is the way they let me like adjust the throne height and things like, and the snare angle a little bit. But like, other than that, like, they're like, this is how the drums are set up. This is how they're tuned. Now you got to play them. And then even within the part, Mark really knows what parts he wants. So like I would groove. That was a full rhythm section. So we would play it down and he'd say, okay, I like what you're doing with the ghost notes there, but maybe don't do that with the kick. Like Mark is one of the more specific producers. And then other producers, like, they're just like, do your thing. I'm hiring you I trust you to do whatever you want. And then anything in between. So
it's funny you should say that. I'm reading the Jeff Porcaro book at the moment, and yeah.
Oh yeah.
Where they're saying about, hiring Jeff because they knew that he would play the right groove for it. And there was one I read about the other day where a producer said to him, "Oh, Jeff, if you could just play that blah 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 blah, like tom fill going into the bridge." And then he recorded the song, and then he got to the bridge and he picked up some drumsticks and just dropped them on the toms. They were like, okay, and let's just do that again. And they did it again, and he did exactly the same thing, played one-handed and dropped these sticks. And he went and spoke to the singer, the producer, and said, shall I sack him? I mean, it's Jeff Porcaro. And she said, you're in charge, go and speak to him. So he went in, and he realised what he'd done. He said, Jeff, I will never tell you how to play a drum fill ever again if you don't do that again.
Wow, that's funny. I mean, good for him, but like I would never do that. I mean, again, he was in a different era where like the studio musicians were like ruling, and he was one of the top guys working in at the time. So, but I have a friend, I'm not going to say who he is, but he's a really happening session drummer now, and we're really good friends. We've known each other for years. And I'm a diplomat. Like, even if the producer's telling me something that makes no sense, I'll try it. But what I'll do now is I'll say, hey, let's do that, but let me try this, and you can just choose what you want. When I was younger, I didn't even, I did a steel session in the 90s, and I was too nervous to tell Donald Fagen that what he wanted me to play was the wrong part for the song. So I played a really shit part, knowing they wouldn't keep it, and I knew what it was supposed to be, but I just who am I to tell him? It was before I learned how to be a diplomat. But this friend of mine, who's a really happening session drummer now, he's not a diplomat. He would do what Porcaro does. He doesn't have a problem telling a producer to go fuck themselves. And he knows it costs him work in some instances, but he knows the people that are calling him, they're going to trust him and let him do his thing.
Yeah.
And so,
okay.
Yeah.
Last couple of questions. I've got a couple of curveball
Okay,
questions here for you, Wolf. And the first one of those is,
sure.
what are your hobbies away from drums?
That's cool. It changes. I was for about 10 years I was doing a lot of photography. And to the point where I nerded out and I studied lighting, and I mean I didn't take formal lessons, but I had to learn how to retouch pictures digitally. And I have a bunch of photography gear in my place in New York, and I got to the point where I was getting hired by friends of friends to shoot people's promo shots. But I reached a point where if I knew if I wanted to be better than I was, and I was solid, but I knew if I wanted to be better, I'd have to just put the 10,000 hours in. And I'm just I'm not passionate enough about to do it. So I just eventually stopped shooting. And aside from that, I mean, I used to love cooking. I cook once in a while. I don't do it as much anymore. These days, it's more, I don't even know what to call it, just growth. Because like I said, I checked off a lot of my bucket list things pretty early on in my life. Like by the time I was in my mid-20s, I had done everything that I wanted to do, or at least that I grew up wanting to do. And then, but by the time my second marriage fell apart, I knew I was really stunted. As a person, I was like, music I've got together, but as a person. So I did a lot of therapy, got into meditation. I read a shitload of books that deal with psychology and communication and growth and neuroscience. I just really want to. Do you know who Dave Elitch is?
No.
He's check him out. He's a pretty major drummer himself, but he's more known as the drum guru. He teaches everybody. I mean, A-list drummers study with him because he teaches body mechanics. So if you're a major touring drummer and you have problems with your hands, when you're in LA, you have a lesson with him. So I know UK drummers have studied with him. I know drummers out here have studied with him. I took a lesson with him, and I've been friends with him for years. And he really understands body mechanics, but he also makes a connection with not holding, we all hold tension, and that's really where a lot of the shit starts. So and that's how he and I became friends, because we realized we have a lot of that common. Getting to the root of tension is usually emotional stuff. So so that's the kind of stuff, if in my 20s I would have laughed if you had told me that this was the shit that I'm into now. But so I spend, I meditate every day, and it definitely makes the quality of my life better. So but I don't even know if I call it a hobby, but it's something I'm passionate about.
Yeah.
So other than that, music between drumming and programming, that takes up a lot of time. So I mean, and I'm really lucky. I got to say, if I were still touring and only touring, when the pandemic happened, especially in the States where they don't really take care of citizens here, I would have been fucked. So the fact that I program and that I've been doing remote work, and I've been able to work consistently through the whole thing, and now that it's getting safer, I'm back in studios playing live drum sessions. But I gotta say, I'm really lucky to just be so busy that I don't really have time time for a hobby, at least the way I photography. It was eating up too much time, and it was taking away from music. So it's just music, and then meditation. It's kind of my life and my girlfriend.
And that question came from me thinking, well, drums for all of us would have started as a hobby. So, it can still be a hobby even though we get paid to do it. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So music is still, I mean, I'm sure you can relate to this, but once it becomes your full-time job, a lot of the magic is gone. I mean, it's still a great thing. There's nothing like it. And we have to do it. We have no choice. We have to do it. No sane person would do this professionally unless it's just that you have to do it. So, so it's not it's not my hobby in that sense anymore. Like I really don't listen to music for fun that often these days. I mean, once in a while I will. It's just like just work, especially programming, takes way more time than drumming. Because drumming, I can go in and I can, unless I'm tracking 12 songs. Like, but if I'm just going to track a song, I can play it in real time, however many takes I need to do. But programming, especially if I'm programming a full track, not just drums, I can spend days on one song. So yeah, just work takes up most of my time. And then yeah, I don't really think I have, yeah. Photography was my last hobby, but that's about it. Yeah.
So my last curveball question for you: what's your favorite cookie?
Cookie. Okay. When I was 20, I gave up sugar, dairy, um, any processed like grains, and I gave up like all the really good tasting stuff, red meat. So I haven't had a cookie in years. So like I'm still like eat sweet things, but like I'll make a smoothie. So it'll be like a frozen banana, almond butter, cacao, which is just like raw chocolate, but without sugar and without dairy. And like that's like about as indulgent as I get. So I haven't had like cake or cookie or pie in years. But when I could eat cookies, a really good oatmeal cookie would have been a thing to eat. And you can get vegan, sugar-free oatmeal cookies now, but I haven't had the urge to have one in a while. So
we've
yeah.
we've recently gone sort of more meat free in our house, and it's yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
It's incredible. It's been so easy to do. We're just using like, I don't know if you have it in the States. It's called corn. Do you have corn?
I'm familiar with it. I've had it in Europe and in the UK. I've never seen a restaurant serve it in the States, but I remember having it. It's like an alternative protein from what I remember.
It's so easy to cook with. It's just, easy.
Yeah, it's cool. No, there's a lot of good stuff also in the UK. Like because I grew up eating the opposite. Like one of my jobs to pay for drums, I worked at Baskin Robbins, which I don't know if they have those in the UK, but it's an ice cream franchise. So like just growing up in Philly, it was cheesesteaks, pizza, ice cream, donuts, soda. And when I gave up all that stuff, was around the time I was moving to New York, and all of a sudden New York has so much food. I had Indian food for the first time. I had like Thai food, Ethiopian, Nigerian, Egyptian, Moroccan, whatever. I got, and you can eat meat-free versions and dairy-free versions of all that stuff. So, and my favorite, I've never been to India, but like the best Indian food I've had has been over there. And so if you want to eat healthy, there's like no shortage. And I've always eaten great in the UK. So I don't know, like, and I forgot to ask you, are you in London, or like whereabouts are you?
About 40 minutes outside London. Yeah. So okay. Southeast.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. So, but yeah, there's a lot of good Indian takeaway. I haven't been anywhere there where there's not at least like one good place to get a curry somewhere nearby.
Exactly. Right. So from random curveball questions to my last more serious question. If you could give just one bit of advice to people that are starting out with drums and maybe want to make a career out of it, what would that advice be?
It's not that exciting. It's pretty standard advice, but it's be good at what you do, be reliable, be versatile, and don't be an asshole. That's basically it. And that's what was told to me, years ago. Like, just especially the last part. Like, I know some amazingly gifted musicians that their personality keeps them from getting beyond a certain point. Where, like, I know another person, I won't name a name, but there's a guy that I always recommend for gigs because he's one of my favorite drummers to listen to. And like, I've given his name to a bunch of people, and they're like, yeah, man, he's amazing, but like he's hard to deal with as a person. So it's, and I can tell you who it is after, like, it's the the interpersonal aspect is so important. Like, because as you know, especially if you're on the road, you spend more time off stage with these people than you do on stage. So like, you've got to be cool to hang with and easy to get along with. And because this business is really word of mouth. So if you want people to remember, like, digging what you play like, and just digging energy and like your communication and all that stuff. So, but I mean, I'm sure there's more specific advice I'd give younger drummers now, because it's such a different world. So I actually, let me add one thing, because this is newer. I envy like kids growing up now, because they have access to like stuff like this. Like, there's so much information on the internet. Like you can get, like, just from interviews, you can hear different drummers, like you can hear them talking. If you want to know how Steve Gadd played a specific thing, you can see Steve Gadd talking about it, or David Garibaldi, or you can see 100 other people breaking it down and teaching it. And so chops are so much easier to come by now. And like, just getting the secrets of the grooves. When I was coming up, like, you had to either go to a drum clinic or just like listen to the records over. I would hold my finger on the turntable to slow the vinyl down, so I could kind of understand. Now there's software where you can time stretch it, slow it down, but the pitch stays even. And you can get FaceTime lessons or Zoom lessons with anybody you want. So there's all this there's a wealth of knowledge out there for anybody that wants it. That's the great part. The downside is everybody sounds the same now, because they're all getting nobody's figuring it out. There was more mystery. Like when I was a kid, a lot of my friends were learning from records, and we were guessing, and we would all guess wrong. And that's how we came up with our own variations. And so my bit of advice would be, like, really do whatever you can to sound a little different, and just not different for the sake of being different, but just find something that's uniquely you in your playing or programming, or both. Oh, can I tell you my Garibaldi story? Because I forgot about that.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I mentioned when I was younger, I toured with Grover Washington Jr. And he was one of like the top jazz touring artists. I mean, it was more smooth jazz, but he would headline all the big jazz festivals. And we were playing Monterey, which is like near San Francisco. It's Northern California, I believe. The Monterey Jazz Festival. And at the time, I was much younger than everybody else in the band. I had really long hair. I really stuck out. I was hard to miss. I looked like I should have been playing with Guns N' Roses, not with the smooth jazz artist. And so after we played, and I did a drum solo, and after we finished, I'm walking through the crowd, and some guy who I didn't know who he was, some guy just stops me and he said, "Hey, were you Grover's drummer?" And I said, "Yes." And he was like, "Man, I really dug your solo." And the song I did the solo in was in 5/4, and he got really specific about the time signature and whatever else. And I was like, "Oh, obviously you're a musician." And he said, "Yeah." I said, "You're a drummer?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Oh, cool. Are you playing here today?" And he said, "Well, I'm playing with a local band. We're not playing on the main stage. We're playing somewhere else." And I was like, "Oh, that's really cool. Well, good luck. Good luck to you, sir," whatever. Like, and I was like, "I'm Stephen Wolf." And he said, "I'm David Garibaldi." And I had no idea I'd been talking to David Garibaldi the whole time, because this was the 90s, and I only knew what he looked like from the Tower of Power records. It was before the internet really started. So like, I didn't know what he looked like at that point. And I was, not that I was being condescending to him, but like, it's David Garibaldi. You want to give his dues. And so I was just like, "Oh yeah, well, good luck, man." And when he told me who he was, I was really embarrassed. And, but he was very cool about it. So that's my Garibaldi story. So.
We both have embarrassing Garibaldi stories then, because in the interview that I did with him, I was thinking, "Oh, what song should I talk to about?" And then I was like, "I know, I'll choose It's Not the Crime." And of course, I chose the one flipping song that he's not playing on. In all those years of Tower of Power, I chose the one song. I was like, "Oh, I love your drumming on that song." And he was like, "Well, first of all, it's not me on that song." I was just like, "No.
Oh,
kill
man.
me."
That's funny. Oh, man. That's That's hysterical. That's great. But I'm sure he was cool about it because, like I said, he's a cool dude. So that's
yeah.
great.
And I was like, okay, let's talk about
Oh
sweet
man,
cakes then
cool.
instead.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's funny.
Wolf, thank you so much for spending your time with us here at DrumWise today. It really has been an absolute pleasure talking with you.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.